Hello and welcome to episode 12 of Around the Lens, a weekly visual journalism roundtable podcast where a group of visual journalists gather to discuss news of the week related to our career field. I'm your host, David J. Murphy, visual journalist with about 16 years experience, currently based out of Charleston, South Carolina. And at this point, my co-host Zach Roberts would jump in and talk about his experience working in New York and Alaska and the BBC and the Guardian and the Village Voice. But he's actually up in New Hampshire right now working the primaries. So, sorry, Zach, that you can't be here, but we're going to do this without you. It's going to be awesome, but we'll have you on next week. We miss you. Wish you were here. Okay, well, we're recording. Actually, we're not only recording, but we're actually broadcasting live. This is the first episode of Around the Lens that we're trying this out on. So I hope that if you are watching, you can see this. And if you're not watching this, that you're listening to it, it's probably not going to be any different for you. But you can watch this live, or you can watch the recorded broadcast after it goes up on YouTube after this episode is done recording. But so a bunch of different ways for you to see the show or listen to the show. Anyways, we are recording, broadcasting February 8th, Monday, and my panelists tonight are two excellent visual journalists, longtime career and friends of mine, David Wells and Ethan Rocke. Guys, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourselves?
Hi, David. Nice to be here. Looking forward to having this conversation. I am a former newspaper photographer. Spent about 5 years working for different newspapers in different parts of the country, and for the last 30 years I've been a freelance magazine photographer, and the last 3 or 4 years turning to motion like everybody else is, and continually enjoying the challenges and the rewards of an ever-changing market. I'm the oldest, I think, of the three of us, and so I win the medal for still being in business as the market changes drastically and radically, but so far it's been a good ride.
Hi, I'm Ethan Rocke, and I actually like the title multimedia storyteller these days because just like David mentioned, with all the disruption in our industry over the last decade plus, it's been going on for a while now. When you're full-time freelancer like me, it's kind of you go kind of where the business is. So I still do editorial, and that is my I guess favorite thing to do is editorial and journalistic storytelling. But I also do a lot of commercial stuff, and have also moved more away from still photography. Let me back up. So I started in the military as a Marine combat correspondent. That's where I learned still photography and newspaper journalism. Did that for about 10 years and got out, finished my undergrad from Syracuse University in photojournalism, and then went to grad school at the University of Oregon for multimedia journalism, and that's where I learned filmmaking, video production, and that, I would say, it's the bulk of my business these days, is more of the video side. So I guess that's pretty much it. I also am a writer, so write for Maxim magazine and some other outlets, and so I write, shoot, and produce videos. So that's me. That's it. All right.
Cool. Well, little known fact, Ethan and I actually have a pretty good past. We went to school together at Syracuse, lived in the same house. It was an awesome time. The USMC fraternity, as I like to think of it, with another friend, and it was an awesome time. So you did the Marine Corps, got out, did the school thing, and now you're doing the freelance thing, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, it was go Orange. Remember our days at Syracuse together at the old Marine. We call it the Marine Detachment. So good times, last one passed there.
I should throw in here that I have a Syracuse connection as well. The last newspaper job I had for 2 years in 84, 85 was actually at the Post-Standard.
Oh, all right.
So,
cool.
Yes, yeah.
An awesome newspaper.
Yes. Yeah.
Did you do any work for the Daily Orange?
I did not, actually, because I didn't come through SU. I came there, actually, I was already working I was trying to get from the West Coast, where I'd worked for like the LA Times and San Francisco Examiner, actually in pursuit of a woman, trying to get to the East Coast, and the closest I could get was Syracuse, New York. So that was my last newspaper job before I moved to New York City to become a freelancer.
Okay. So even though you were a freelancer in New York City, you probably still did work for New York Times or other. You still do photojournalism in New York City?
I did tons of photojournalism. What I discovered was that because I had worked for the LA Times and the San Francisco Examiner and a number of newspapers along the way, a lot of those were the first clients that I went to because they were looking for people to do portraits and business execs and celebrities and movie stars in New York. So I actually was very lucky. I had work on the third day I was in New York City, which as a freelancer, as you well know, is really the key. And so I hit the ground running, not because I'm so brilliant, but just because at that point in time there were many fewer people who were doing it, which is circling back to the whole discussion about the market today versus 20 years ago.
Yeah, you know what's funny is I actually moved up to New York to follow a woman, and I hit the ground and fell on my face because I had no plan. And this was 2007, like right around the same time as the crash.
Ooh.
Let's just say nobody was hiring. I did eventually find work. It wasn't great work, but it was work doing photography. And then I found a better job working for the Air National Guard. So, but I thought that was interesting how we kind of share that connection.
Oh.
Women, huh? I mean, really. Yeah. Women, if you're out there, I love you. But.
I would just say, you know, to ping off what you guys were just saying. Yeah, you know, this industry, especially the way it's been going for so long, and say, you know, newspapers continuing to make layoffs and shrink staffs. You know, I remember I went to the Eddie Adams workshop in 2013, and John White was one of the speakers and was just amazing and brilliant. And it blew my mind. A guy like that, you know, Pulitzer Prize winning, you know, just a brilliant photojournalist who'd worked in the industry for so long, was just kind of cast aside by the Sun-Times and with so many others. But the point there is that yeah, it's a very tough market because a lot of people who you know, have been laid off from the staff jobs are all kind of competing in the same sphere, and you know, you definitely got to kind of find your niche and know what you're doing. But anyway, that's all I wanted to say about that.
All right. Well, now we start on a bad note. Just kidding.
No.
It's the reality of the situation. You know, it's tough. But let's go on and start talking about topics because we got a lot to talk about tonight. Now let's start with the first story of the week I found was basically this news story about a media outlet that was blurring the faces of minors. So in this situation, some kids thought it would be a good idea to almost spell out a racist swear word or racist word and pose for a photo. So it's the N word, just so everybody knows, but they used stars instead of G's. So I don't know what they were trying to go there. I mean, would people not assume they know what they're talking about? Anyways, really smart move, really smart. And so these kids, you know, decided, hey, since their futures didn't matter, they would just get photographed making this slur or spelling the slur with their shirts because, you know, photos don't go anywhere after you take them, and they definitely don't live forever on the internet where they're tied to your name and show up wherever anyone does a Google search about you. So anyways, a couple of media outlets blurred out the faces of the kids, claiming, oh, these are minors, so they didn't want to show the faces of the kids. And, you know, other outlets didn't blur the faces of the kids because ultimately this is journalism, this is news, you know. I mean, where would we be if we blurred people's faces out when we shot, you know, a news story just because there happens to be a minor involved? I mean, there have been many, many famous photos that featured, you know, young children. And if we said, oh, well, they're children, that the significance of that photo doesn't matter. Let's blur their face. I mean, I don't know what journalistic standard some organizations prescribe to that, you know, the ones who don't blur do, but it just seems odd to me. But what I want to do is I want to know your thoughts on this. You know, is there ever an instance when a visual journalist should obscure or censor their work? You know, how does this relate to journalistic integrity?
Well, can I jump in here because I looked at this in advance of our discussion, and I have a slightly different take, which is that the other thing that's I find a problem in the current media climate with the firing of photographers and all that is the firing of editors and gatekeepers. And I mention that because this particular photo, looking at the link you sent us to on the route, was posted by the individuals in the photo. And I mention that because back in the day, one of us would have made that photograph, and typically our presence tells those kids or our subject matter that this is going to be used widely and published. And they certainly made a mistake, but I think the part of the bigger mistake is even just that it got out there becomes the first part of the discussion, which I don't see in reading that article if that even came up or not, separate of the blurring of the faces. And maybe I'm going off message here, but chime in there, guys.
Yeah, so I'll jump in and just say I agree. I agree with you about kind of. I think the broader point you're speaking to is like the lessening of standards with regard to the trimming of staffs and fewer gatekeepers, as you put it. I know a lot of. I remember in my graduate program, we talked a lot about how there's a lot of people kind of critiquing the current state of the industry, by saying, there are no gatekeepers because we have all these publishing tools these days that anybody can go straight to an audience with your message. And I think that kind of speaks to what we're talking about with social media and this obviously very ill-conceived idea of, if I understand that story correctly, if I remember, those kids were part of a bigger group in the school. It was like something organized by the school or students in the school to spell something else out for like a rally or something or sports thing. I can't remember exactly what it was. And then those students came together and said, hey, wouldn't this be, apparently, wouldn't this be funny? Or I don't know what they were thinking. Just like Dave said, it was obviously not a good idea. I don't know why anyone would want to do it, let alone post it publicly, but they did. So then this becomes kind of, I think, you kind of have to parse the ethics and the legal aspects of it with regard to what's the social media platform standards, I know, for example, I shouldn't say I know, but if I understand Facebook's, for example, it's kind of whatever you publish is, is out there basically, that's the first rule of social media, right? Don't put it on Facebook or anywhere else unless you are ready for the world to see it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think I don't know exactly. I can't speak to what specific editors made what calls, but I would think some of them, with regard to blurring the faces, maybe they had something codified in their own code of ethics that said that that's how they handle it. I definitely don't think that's an industry standard. I'm sure you see variants from outlet to outlet. So I would just say, my ethical, if you're asking the question, my ethical take on it, I don't think I would blur the faces because those individuals, they put that out there, and once you do that, it's kind of out there. Saying that now, I think about the fact that they are kids, and I don't know, it's a tough call actually. Maybe you guys can kind of chime in on that, but I tend to be. To think that when people put stuff out on social media and make themselves news, it's kind of fair game.
I mean, it's a tough call because, okay, let's say you're the one social, or you're the outlet that blurs their faces, right? I mean, even the story discusses there are multiple outlets that are going to publish this photo. Not all of them are going to blur the faces. Some are. I mean, ultimately, does it matter if you blur the faces? If not all the outlets are on the same page about blurring or not blurring, have different standards, different protocols, ultimately the picture will get out. I mean, even the initial source for this photograph, whatever social media outlet it came from, whether it be Facebook or whatnot, there's no blurring of photos on Facebook. No one is caring about privacy and whatnot. I mean, ultimately, I have no sympathy for the decision of the students who made this decision to do this, and personally, I would think it teaches them a lesson. A lesson in basically just putting yourself out there and doing things and thinking about what you do before you do them, and understanding that there are consequences to your actions, and everybody's out there with a camera taking your picture. So you gotta think about what you're doing.
At the same time, I like saying it out loud. Go ahead, David. David wants to chime in somewhere.
Well, no, the flip side of that is I have a 23-year-old daughter who's a little older than the kids in that picture, but the downside of social media is that lives on. I mean, those five girls are now, emblazoned across
six letters in the word.
Yeah, I just wanted to, yeah, there were 6 girls in the photo, and their faces are emblazoned across the internet. I mean, I guess my hesitancy is that in the old days, with a conventional gatekeeper, the gatekeeper would have somehow solved that problem. And I'm not saying we should go back to that, but we've entered into a brave new world, obviously, and I don't know. I go both ways on the blurring out of the faces, and I think the other point's really true is that with a lot of these things that get embargoed, and sometimes like the beheadings and some of the horrific stuff that the American media, for example, doesn't show fully, somebody else does. So it's always out there. Maybe the question is, does the individual outlet? I mean, they do. The New York Times responds to its audience by certainly posting some things and not posting other things, and all the media channels respond to their audience by limiting it. So, and I guess they're responding to their audience. The other question I have, and this is a lawyer question, but is there anything about the age, under 18, informed consent, those kinds of sort of release legal issues, or was it also just paranoia that there might be legal issues? And I don't know the answer to any of those.
And I think that I never really worked in a big newsroom with a lot of resources. I was in the Marine Corps until 2011. So when I got out, I was kind of straight into the freelance world. But
what would the Marine Corps do if they saw this photo? Speaking of gatekeepers.
Yeah, really.
Yeah, this would be at the. So is your question if it was military members? Yeah, that would definitely be in some hot water.
It wouldn't get released by the military, that's for sure.
Yeah, certainly. And I think that if someone reported it, like seeing that from military members, it would definitely be an actionable, offense.
NJPs all the way around.
So back to the question of legality. I mean, again, that kind of speaks to the benefits of having, an established code of ethics within your organization, your institution. Like I know a couple codes of ethics that really stick out in my mind as really high ethical standards, and those are the AP and the I want to say public broadcasting, right? NPR and PBS.
Right.
Both of those have very very high ethical standards, and they have like no kidding codes of ethics that you have to read and conform to when you're part of those organizations. Now in the freelance world, that is completely diffused. There's a lot less of that. It's kind of a hodgepodge of the freelancer, whatever editor he's working with may or may not have a strong relationship with that editor, and the editor may have a different ethical take than that. You know what I mean? So it's a very, I think what we're the thing I keep coming around to in this discussion is how I feel like there's kind of an erosion of ethical standards just by virtue of the fact that there are far fewer actually established codes of ethics, and it's a very much more nebulous thing, between the freelancers and the editors that they're working with, and then up the chain. So that's kind of just generally disconcerting. I think in this case, it's I have to assume that those outlets that blurred, they consulted with, their own conscience as well as any legal concerns, right? So, go ahead.
My question might be, David, if you don't mind, and I'm volunteering for this, is to come back maybe in 6 months or a year, because frankly, separate of the moral and the question we're raising now, the gatekeeper issue, is a straight legal one. And I'm very curious, because this is not the first time that these kinds of things have been put out there. And so I just wonder what has happened in not the court of public opinion, but the real court system, when somebody puts something out of somebody and then somebody else is humiliated, embarrassed. What I don't know enough about it to speak intelligently, but I'd be curious to see 6 months or a year from now, are we still talking about this? Has any of these girls sued? Did everybody just go home happily ever after?
Yeah.
Well, I'm not a lawyer, but I did stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night, so let me talk to my extensive legal knowledge here. Okay, so honestly, if I'm a newspaper or a publication and I see this story going around, it's news. I mean, you can't be hampered by what you publish based on potential legal outcry from people. It's
you
something
can.
that's out there.
You can, and outlets are. I mean, the one thing that's gonna.
Can you give an example?
Well, I think the one thing that a media outlet is the first priority of a media outlet when making ethical or decisions about ethics is are we legally liable for any possible civil action or whatever or criminal action. So I think that is absolutely going. And I mean, anytime if you've ever dealt with entertainment lawyers or lawyers in the media sphere, they're pretty skittish about that stuff, So if there's like a possibility, they're probably going to let you're making yourself potentially liable here. So I think that is always going to be a concern, a fundamental concern for any media outlet. But from an ethical standpoint, I do want to circle back because I think I initially kind of just blurted out that hey, it's public. You put it out in the public. Your fault. But I also have 2 daughters. Who are not, as far as I know, racists. I think I'm doing a pretty good job at raising them to see that word as abhorrent.
Ethan, let me send you a link to a picture I found of your. No, I'm just kidding.
So the point I'm making is, I don't have any fear that my daughters, when they become teenagers, they're 10 and 8 right now, when they become teenagers, will ever do something as stupid as those girls did. However, I absolutely am very well aware that young people do stupid things. I did a lot of stupid things when I was a teenager, and so I think that there is a sort of responsibility when making that call to kind of take that into consideration. Yes, it's let's put it in these terms. That word, all right, even with the asterisk or whatever they use to spell it out, is in my mind, like, to a lot of people, it doesn't make sense. That word is just
a lot of people in your mind.
It's so offensive and so so damaging, basically, right? For a lot of people to see that, and I just think that so it is a very serious thing. But again, I don't ever want to assume that someone who makes that kind of terrible mistake is beyond reform, I guess. They can learn from this and come away from it. And maybe the hard lesson is, you don't get your face blurred, people know who you are, and it's on you to make a very public apology and save your credibility after the fact, So
I think that's what I was trying to get at before, which is, I think, David, your first point was clear as day. It's a news story and a discussion. But we also know that news is a business, and social media and what we're doing here through your channel is a business, and businesses are continually shaped, frankly, by lawsuits. And so if this somehow does turn into something, not on the journalistic side, but on the privacy side, who posted it, maybe that becomes part of something that finally sinks into the average teenager that, oh yeah, I remember those girls did that stupid thing. Maybe I'm not gonna. That may shape journalistic, it may shape teenage girls' behavior, it may just disappear too in 2 weeks. That's why I was saying we might want to come back to this in 6 months or a year to see where it went.
Yeah, to your response, Ethan, I'm not necessarily saying that this type of thing shouldn't be looked at by lawyers. I think it does bear sort of a legal standpoint, legal point of view. But my thinking, and it may be idealistic or it might be incorrect. But my thinking is leave that up to the lawyers to figure out after the fact. And maybe sort of like, well, once it's out there, it's out there. But I think when you start second guessing every decision about what to publish and whether or not you're going to be sued for it, I think that really almost puts a hamper on just getting the news out there. It's like, I don't know. I mean, again, maybe I'm being idealistic, but that's my perspective.
No, I mean, I understand what you're saying, but I do think that that lawyers are always going to say thanks for that, but you're not a lawyer. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, I just kind of know, like I know that as a magazine editor or newspaper editor or any kind of gatekeeper in a media organization, if you make the call and publish something that's going to open your organization up to legal liability, there's a good chance you're not going to be around much longer. And I mean, a good example of this is the Rolling Stone, was it UVA?
The UVA.
The UVA rape story, rape on campus, and I mean, that was pretty much like, you can't get more botched than Rolling Stone did with that story, and their editor-in-chief, was it, or their managing editor? No, because I think Jan Winter's still editor-in-chief, but the managing editor, the editor who was responsible for it, did make an exit from Rolling Stone following that debacle. So, and rightly so. I mean, somebody had to answer for that, because it really was, I think, an editorial failure. And I love Rolling Stone. Like, that's I love that outlet. I'm a big fan of like Matt Taibbi and the legacy that they have, but they really punted that one into the stands. And that, I think, is a perfect example of an ethical breach and a legal debacle. The Rolling Stone's currently being sued by, if I'm not mistaken, the fraternity, that was kind of, allocated against, so to speak, in that, and I think maybe some other lawsuits too. So that's something, I actually like when you can separate, ethics from legality. I think it's something that lay people don't really make that connection. They kind of often, a lot of people who like to comment about journalistic ethics like to paint it in very, very simple terms, that it's like, well, that they shouldn't be allowed to do that, and it's like, well, that's kind of a slippery slope in terms of free speech and First Amendment and those kinds of considerations. So when you can kind of separate the ethical question from, like, is this even legal, it often makes your decision a lot easier. It's like, there's a law in the state that we're in against publishing photos of minors. You're going to just say, well, we're going to blur those faces, so that's kind of where I stand on that. Is it is something to always, like, you definitely always have to worry about legal concerns in those scenarios.
Let me ask you this. I mean, we had that incident last year, I think it was, or maybe more than that, I can't remember, with the college students who were singing the racist chant on the bus. Obviously they were older than 18, so they weren't minors, but I mean, does any thoughts go on to that? That was also a product of someone's cell phone video that was published online and then turned into news.
Yeah, so I had a very visceral reaction to that. I'm sorry, I'll let you go, David. I'll make this quick, but I had a very visceral reaction to that. That was like it was highly offensive to me. I was very, appalled that anyone would chant that, and so I think that they like published the heck out of that. I think that they did pretty good damage control. Well, when I say they, I know at least one of the students did pretty good damage control. Where he had like a press conference with his parents and he apologized. I think that is all that someone who like that should get from the media is, like, the best bet you have. We're going to publish the heck out of this, and the best bet you have is, apologizing and don't ever behave like that again. And that's kind of how that one went down. So for me, I would publish that. I think it's news. I think that kid needed a wake-up call about what century he's living in, and I think he got it. And when I say that kid, there was more than one, but I don't want to.
Yeah, there was a group.
Yeah, it was a group. So those kids got a wake-up call about what century they're living in. So
David?
that's how I feel about
I
that.
think the thing that the point of both, it's interesting to mention the videotape on the bus of the fraternity, because in essence it's talking about some of the same things, which is that people feel comfortable making these kind of clearly offensive statements, and when they get called out, published or somehow disseminated, then they finally start looking at themselves, and maybe that's the sort of upside of this process, and these things don't happen, they're not stopping. I'm guessing they're going to keep going. I would say, just as a point of difference, as an editor, though I never actually worked as an editor, I was always a content generator, as they call us now, but I do think maybe there's a difference between college students and high school students in terms of everything from the age of responsibility and stuff like that, because you're right, they didn't do any blurring out on that fraternity on the bus story, and I would not have expected that. I'm going back and forth in my head on this particular case, because I don't know. I guess to me the big thing is just keeping to see the gatekeeper question I talked about at the beginning, and B, when do people start to realize that stuff is going to go out there, and then they either don't put it out there or finally start changing their behavior, or both.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's going to definitely fall on people to be more conscious about, one, their actions, and two, what what people are taking photographs of. And I don't think anybody is going to stop shooting pictures of what they see and will find interesting, but at the very minimum, the people who do the actions that could be perceived as, I would guess, offensive to society should probably take note of this and then adjust their actions accordingly.
If I can jump in before we move on to the next thing, the irony is if you flip both of these things on their heads, the whole current discussion about violence by police officers, especially against communities of color, is a function of people also doing some of this exact same thing, of recording outside of the gatekeepers and outside of the professional framework like we are within. But the people who are most cognizant of how that stuff is going to be used are the people who are doing the atrocious acts on that end. And so it's interesting that there's a set of people who I think are aware of how this stuff is being used and being portrayed, and then there's another set of people who aren't as aware. And it may just be a function of age, but I think there's more than that.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, well, let's go ahead and move on to our next topic. We got a lot to talk about tonight, although this is a good discussion and probably want to re-engage with it later, perhaps after the legal actions are taken, right, David?
Right, exactly.
All right, we'll have you back on in 6 months. Great. Okay. Our next topic of the evening are grants. Now, I'll be honest, I personally never had to apply for or deal with the grant process. But I know, Ethan, you've done not necessarily grants, but you've received money for things, and David, I'm sure as a freelancer, you may have had some experience with this. So again, I'm gonna throw it out to you two. What are your thoughts on grants? I mean, obviously, a lot of smaller projects, a lot of personal projects are funded by grants. But what are your thoughts on working to get grants? Have you succeeded? Why have you failed? What are some of the resources you go out there to find? And if grants aren't the way to go, how do you get money to do what you want to do?
Well, I actually have been pretty fortunate. I've had a number of grants. I had the third Nikon NPPA documentary sabbatical back in 1988. I've had a couple Fulbright fellowships. I've been very, very fortunate with grants. And I mean, the sort of takeaway lesson that I've learned, and I talk about this when I do presentations, is that when I've had grants, it's almost always that I understand that it's more about the subject matter and the expertise and the story that I'm trying to tell, and photography is just a language that's being used, rather than thinking about the grants as being about photography. And I mention that because I think that the people who are most successful at getting grants these days are also understanding that basically you have a funder who has a wad of money to give away because they believe in a mission, like the Alexia. You two being at Syracuse must have seen the Alexia judging at some point in time. I was a judge in '98 for the Alexia Fellowship, and so there, of course, they have a very specific mission, and the winners obviously like Tim Matsui from a couple of years ago with the Women's Initiative. He did a marvelous job of matching his project and their mission. My issue with grants, and I don't mean in any way to look at the grants that I've had, sort of the gift horse and a mouth problem, is that there are a number more grants, like you had mentioned. I think it's the Visura grant, which was just awarded, I think today or something. I was just reading the winners about it. Is the outlets issue is much more troubling to me, in the sense that people can create these works, but unless there's some way to get the work in front of a really large audience, you end up having a very narrow niche market project that's created in the niche market dissemination, rather than having a large market dissemination and reaching a large audience of people. So that was, I always thought it's nice they're giving out grants, but I kind of wish they could take their money and actually create some kind of publication or some kind of conduit, so a large number of people would see the work that who's ever getting the grant money creates, so a large number of people see it. That was my experience.
Yeah, I think you mentioned Tim Matsui and his work on sex trafficking in the Pacific Northwest, which is brilliant. Check it out, The Long Night by Tim Matsui. It's great, and he has written a lot. Tim has written a lot in like the promotion of his project about, kind of what you spoke to there, David, about finding your audience, and basically, expanding the audience that you reach with these important, really important, works of journalism. If you watch Tim's film, it's extremely powerful and gut-wrenching, and I think shines a light on an important project that it's one of those projects that kind of moves the needle, so to speak, in terms of social progress and social justice, and I know that I live here in Portland, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Seattle Washington and Oregon are like number 1, number 2 in the country for human trafficking, sex trafficking, and so I know that just here in Portland, I've seen a lot of headlines and a lot of news, like around the same time that Tim's film has made waves, about legislative reforms, and they're basically really trying to address this issue in the Pacific Northwest. So yeah, I think David is absolutely right. It is a grind to after you get the money for the production. Tim got this great grant from Alexia, and I don't want to speak for him, but I think that he probably invested more money than the original grant was in finishing that project and bringing it, distributing as far as he can, or as far as he has. So I think that it's the kind of thing that you get that initial support and you're like, yeah, I got this huge grant money, and then it's like, there's not a lot of support on the back end. You have to kind of do the guerrilla marketing and do that hard work on your own. So that's kind of just, I guess, the current state of things, but it would be nice definitely to, I guess, have more ease of distribution, I guess, after the fact, with some of these grants. And I hope I didn't speak at all for Tim Matsui there, because I was trying to speak very broadly. But I think that his example just stuck out in my mind.
Well, I'm actually going to contact him, let him know what you said about him, and then get his comments on that. And you can hear him talk about what you see. No, but that's interesting. I mean, you bring up an interesting point, David and Ethan, and it's, again, something I'm learning as well right now, is that, so you're saying that you go out, you get this grant, you create this body of work based on this grant, and then that's it. Like, the body of work exists, but then, if you do nothing, it dies, essentially, or it goes into the ether that is the internet, the machine, the monster that sucks in media, and then it goes away. There's no back-end support after the actual content is created by either the foundation or any other organization that's supporting you. Because I was just looking up Tim Matsui, and I can see like a website for the Long Night movie and a bunch of other Long Night stuff, but again, I never heard of this movie before you talked about it.
Yeah, go ahead, David.
Short answer is yes. What you said is exactly been my experience. I got a grant from the MacArthur Foundation. I was not a genius. I got what I call a very intelligent grant, but not a genius grant.
That's the one right below it.
That's exactly one.
I would love to have a very intelligent grant, by the way. So
hey,
I'm very envious.
Honestly, I'll take an average intelligence grant. I mean, I'm not picking it.
The connection being that in 1992, they gave me a wad of money to photograph the Israeli-Palestinian relationship. And the year 92 is important because they were prescient enough, and more prescient than I was, by the way, because I was photographing conflict, but also coexistence and cooperation between the two people. And they gave me the money in 92. Then 94, the Oslo Peace Accords came along, and there was tremendous demand for the work, and I got it exhibited a bunch of places. And I found out that organizations like the Middle East Studies Association and academic groups and the op-ed pages for newspapers like the Rochester Democrat, just down the road from Syracuse actually, would publish it as an op-ed piece. And I mention all of that because in today's market, a lot of that doesn't exist anymore, like the Sunday magazine market, because my story was first published by the Philadelphia Inquirer Sunday magazine as a 16-page spread and a cover. That market doesn't exist anymore, so I sort of evolved as time went on with the Oslo Peace Accords and the demand for it. And now Tim Matsui, not to pick on Tim, but it is a great project, is doing kind of that same thing of saying, all right, well, the old markets don't exist. Let's see which ones we can create. And one, of course, is he chose motion rather than still. And then, of course, the voices and all the stuff that you get in multimedia storytelling is more powerful than a printed project would probably be. And so it is, in my experience, and the MacArthur money was a perfect example, and my great failing was that I budgeted just enough time to produce the work, and I didn't budget enough time to disseminate it afterwards, and so I ended up spending that money on my own. And I do a lot of stock photography. I still do a fair amount of stock photography. It was much more lucrative back then. But the stock photography is what paid for the promotion, dissemination, exhibition, presentations, etc. So in the end, I made the money back and then some. But in my current projects, I'm much more cognizant about money to create and then money to promote and disseminate. And in the filmmaking world, which is where I think most of us are all migrating to, a lot of times in your budgeting, they're as interested in your promotional budget, finding your market, as in the actual production side. And I didn't mean to stop on you, Ethan.
No, it's funny you mentioned that.
That was great. Go ahead, David.
I was just going to say, obviously we've all seen Star Wars The Force Awakens, right?
Definitely. Saw it 3 times, actually.
David?
I'm a big Star Wars fan.
Not a Star Wars fan, but don't me, guys.
That's it. You're out of here. That's it.
That was it. My short career on.
Shut it down.
That's all right. I'll let it pass this time. Anyways, let's make sure you see episode 8. All right. So I read a story like they spent like $200 million making the movie and like $250 million promoting it and marketing it. So it's what you gotta do. You gotta spend the money and make the money. $2 billion, no chump change.
Yeah, if I had the $250 million, I'd be promoting a lot more successfully. Is that it becomes now it's an organic part of my planning because that single market for getting the work out there, like we used to have the Sunday magazines in particular, doesn't exist. So we have to build our own. To go back to the question that we started with, which is how things have changed so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just want to say, it's one thing, basically what you're looking for here is you're looking for a platform. Ideally, I think, if you have you get one of these grants, I know there's a lot of grants that exist. They're like, we'll give you the money, and you just find your your outlet to publish with. They tend to be like smaller grants, but so if you can get in the type of platform that has a large audience, then that makes it easy. The problem is that's not so easy unless you're an established shooter. You have a relationship with editors. So really, I think what we're talking about here is there's like so many different tiers of like where you can go. I mentioned the fact that we like to say these days that there are no gatekeepers, and we have all these publishing tools, and everybody is a storyteller and can reach millions, with some mouse clicks and everything. And that sounds great, but really, really what you have to do is you have to, if you're going to do the self-publishing route, you have to build your own audience, and you got to figure out your revenue stream after the fact if you're looking to make money on top of what you produce. And that really is the kind of the difficulty there is, like getting the grant money. I think it's just the first step, and it may or may not pay for the entire production. And so that's something to be cognizant of. I know that there are some great, in addition to grants, there are some great fellowships out there, like David mentioned. I know one that I was looking at this year, the Scripps Environmental Journalism Fellowship at CU Boulder is one that I think that I think I'm probably going to hold off, and I may apply for it next year. But that's one that's really attractive. There's many others. I won't list them all, but there are lots of opportunities. It's just a matter of you really do have to be a business person and know how to hustle in this marketplace these days. That's, I think, the biggest factor, and something that I had to learn kind of the hard way as I tried to become a serious freelancer at the end of grad school. It's like, okay, sink or swim. You got to figure this thing out, and it can be tough to navigate it, and it's going to take you a while to kind of build up your business and your network, but and you got to just tap into all these different resources that are out there, from fellowships to grants to crowdfunding to you name it. But you got to kind of figure out what works, and I guess follow the opportunity.
Speaking of
one more thing,
go ahead, David.
The person who sort of mentored me through my grant things many years ago said to me, the most important one is the first one, because the first one is the one that everybody else afterwards looks at and says, oh my God, you didn't do anything stupid, you didn't get in trouble, you didn't snort the money up your nose. Am I allowed to say that? And I mentioned that because
it's live.
I mentioned that because the very first grant I got, and I might encourage anybody who's listening to look at this, is the American Council on Germany gives out a fellowship of 1 month of something like $200 a day plus airfare to go to Germany to do some kind of story. And back in 1987, I spent a month in Berlin doing a story on the Jewish community of Berlin. And it ended up getting published at a bunch of different places. And the story about the Jewish community in Berlin was that the Jews are obviously not native Jews because of the Holocaust, but mostly Israelis and Russians who moved in there later. But the idea was that I got this grant. I didn't do anything dumb. It was published a bunch of places, Sunday Magazine for New York Newsday and things like that. And that was on my resume as the very first grant. And every month I get an email from the American Council on Germany every couple months saying, do you know anybody who might want to apply? So I can only apply once, so I can't apply again. But anytime a foundation sends former winners like me letters saying, please tell your friends to apply, it means they're obviously not getting enough. So you might want to look up, it's called the John J. McCloy Fellowship from the American Council on Germany. And I would strongly encourage you guys to look at it because it's a one-off, but it was really transformative in so many ways.
Okay, great. We'll throw a link to that in the show notes if I can find that on the Google machine. I'm sure it's out there. Well, one thing I wanted to ask you, Ethan, we talked about get money wherever you can get it, right? Kickstarter or crowdfunding or panhandling, whatever it takes to get the money to do your projects. I had seen you on this thing called the Audience Awards, basically saying thanks for the support or thanks for the win to your fans. Can you talk a little bit about what the Audience Awards are and how you got mixed up in that?
Yeah, so let's see, how did I come around to it? It's been a while. I won the Audience Awards LGBT filmmaking competition. And the piece that I won with was a documentary short about a transgender woman and her wife who they had been married for years before she went through transition, and it was kind of just their story, not just their story of going through that process. That was kind of secondary to the fact that they were from the UK, moved to Oregon several years ago, and at the time and up until 2014, I think, basically, Oregon state constitution said they were no longer married. So they became activists with Basic Rights Oregon, which is a local nonprofit activist group, and basically fought hard for equality and eventually won it. So I did like about a 6-minute piece on that. And when I say I did, I worked on that as part of the Portland Multimedia Workshop, which is run through the University of Oregon's Multimedia Journalism program, of which I was a part at the time. And so I worked with a talented young photographer, videographer named Tess Freeman. She was an undergrad there at UO when I was a grad student. And Carrie Wagner was our coach. So that was the project. A friend, I remember, one of my colleagues in my cohort, who's also a very talented filmmaker named Erin Coons. She works for the Columbian newspaper in Vancouver, does multimedia production there, does great work. She sent me a link and said, "Hey, look, I found this LGBT subject competition with the Audience Awards, and I think the prize money was like $1,000." And I said that would be cool, so I entered it and entered our project in that. Let my teammates know and said, if we win, we'll divide up the winnings and go from there. And then it's an Audience Awards thing, right? So it depends on how many people will go vote for you for your project every day. So I think we had a really strong piece, and that's why we won. But we definitely wouldn't have won if I wouldn't have we all wouldn't have obsessed and hit up our vast networks on social media begging people for votes. It's that film is available on my Vimeo. If you want, I can send you a link that you can put in the show notes. But like I said, it's just a 6-minute documentary short. I'm very proud of it. I think it was one of my best shorts. And the Audience Awards, though, your original question was really about the Audience Awards. The Audience Awards is a kind of a social media meets crowdfunding platform. They're doing a lot of stuff with brands these days, but there's a lot of we were talking about following the money, following the opportunities. They have some brand brand partnerships where they basically, those brands ask for user-generated content, and if you win, you get paid. So that's one way to go. That's part of what the Audience Awards does. But it's kind of also just a way to connect filmmakers and creatives, and they run a lot of different competitions. They're sponsored by different groups and stuff like that. So if you just Google Audience Awards, you can become a member and follow that group, and that's pretty much what it is.
Yeah, I checked it out. I signed up. As soon as I create some content I think might win something, I'll try it out and see how it does. But before we move on, David, do you have anything else you'd like to say about grants, funding, or anything like that?
No, I guess the big thing is kind of what Ethan was saying in terms of how he was able to leverage this film that he'd done and this award and all the other stuff. It really is all the stuff that is sort of what the market is today about taking. I talk to my students a lot about this idea that if you've got a project and if you tweak it just a little bit, you might be able to fit it within some larger discussion that's going on, like all the LGBT questions that are now becoming much more common in the larger political discussion, gives him an opportunity to take a film and present it and reach an audience, and also, by the extension of that award, reach larger audiences. So it's really, we don't work in a vacuum, and the more you're aware of the larger discussion out there, the more likely you are to be able to make your work fit in and go forth from there. Okay, great.
Yeah, and I'll add one more thing to that and say, I was really fortunate with that piece. It did get it had legs, so to speak, right. In that long before I entered that competition. I think I entered the competition almost a year after I produced that. But when I first finished the project, I had a friend who was a content curator, I think is the job title, or an editor basically at Upworthy, and and Upworthy's all about social justice stories. So he connected me to one of their top curators there, and he looked at the short and was like, yeah, we want this. So from that post on Upworthy, we got over 80,000 views on that video, so it definitely made the rounds first with Upworthy, and then Audience Awards gave it new life several months later. So those are kind of examples of of how you can reach people. You gotta do the work and make the relationships with editors and pitch them and get it out there, I guess.
Okay, great. Thank you both. All right, moving on to our next topic this week. We're going to talk, going into gear talk. So the Canon 1DX Mark II was recently announced. This is basically the next Canon flagship camera, and ultimately a response to the Nikon D5. So obviously the Nikon D5, the Canon 1DX, these are the flagship cameras that sort of battle each other. And I've mentioned on the show that I'm a Canon user, but I've also used Panasonic and Micro Four Thirds. But at my heart, I love the Canon brand. I've used both Canon and Nikon, but I keep on leaning towards the Canon brand. Let's see, Ethan, I know you've used Canon in the Marine Corps, right? Is that what everybody had to use Canon?
I mean, I used Canon I've used Canon in the Marine Corps and also in my grad program. We had a lot of Canon gear. I'm a Nikon guy, but occasionally we'll shoot with Canon. Can I let David field this one, actually? I just want to take a bathroom break, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
I'll run right back.
How dare you? Okay. David, let's talk cameras. What do you use?
Well,
what do you think of this announcement?
Slightly long story, but it will make sense in a second. In 1993, it's the last time I used an SLR. In 1993, I started using Contax rangefinders, which, if you remember from the day, they're like Leicas, but they're autofocus. And in 93, they were still film cameras, but I was shooting color transparencies, and they were great in low light, and they're small, and they're compact, and you don't look like you know what you're doing. So people leave you alone, which was great for a lot of my work in the Middle East and in South Asia, where I've been working for the last couple decades. In 2003, I went digital, but because I had neither Canon or Nikon legacy lenses, because of that 93 move to rangefinders rather than SLRs, I went right to Olympus. And I was sponsored by Olympus for a couple of years, but I'm not sponsored by Olympus anymore. But I still use Olympus, and I still use the Micro Four Thirds because at the time they had the dust cleaning sensor, which not everybody had. They were much smaller, much more compact, and much cheaper, frankly. I can get a whole bag of fixed focal length, large maximum aperture lenses, shallow depth of field, and fit it all in one bag and travel with it. So I've been using Olympus cameras first, their DSLRs, for a little bit, and the mirrorless since 13 years now. And if you go and you see the movie Other People's Money, Danny DeVito goes to this small town and he's taking this factory town kind of apart, and he talks about making the world's best buggy whips and then going out of business. And I just wonder if Canon hasn't made the world's best buggy whip, because the people who hire me don't say, do you have a Canon or a Nikon? They look at the videos that I do, 99% of which are on the web. If I was doing stuff for cinematic release, it might be another discussion. But cinematic release is one of those things that's also on the decline. I mean, it's all going to the web. We're meeting in the channel where 99% of communication is going. So my Olympuses work fine. I mean, I'll probably migrate up to 4K when it comes along in a few years. Whether it's Olympuses or somebody else, I don't know. But I just looked at that and said, I wonder if they haven't made themselves one incredibly good and not very saleable buggy whip. But
yeah, I mean, I think that the talk about Micro Four Thirds and the Canon, I think Canon and Nikon both need to explore the Micro Four Thirds arena, because I mean, ever since I went to it with the Panasonic GH4, I could see like there's a lot of advantage to having the Micro Four Thirds out there, right? With the Olympus, like what are you using at the Olympus side? David?
EM5 Mark II, just because it has audio in and audio out. It's the one body that has both capabilities.
Do you shoot primarily video or stills with that?
I'm doing both, and the great thing about that particular camera body, and this is really gear-heady, but it's actually quite important, most of the cameras, when you're shooting video, if you tap the button, it stops the video and starts again. With this particular, when you tap the button, it does a frame grab without stopping the video, which for my purposes is really important.
I think that's integrated into the Panasonic GH4 as well. I haven't played around with that too much, but I know so that they have a 4K photo mode, which is specifically designed for shooting video that you will eventually grab stills from. I haven't played with it myself. I either shoot video or I shoot photo, but it is nice to have that capability. But yeah, you're right. I like to snap a photo while I'm shooting video, and I remember you could do that with the Canon 5D Mark II when you were shooting the 1080p video, but it had to actually stop the video, record the photo, and then go back to the video. So obviously you couldn't continuously use that video stream.
Right, and I really like that because I do a lot of jobs where the client will say, no, actually we just want both, and so I can say, I can get you both. It's actually very easy for me to get you video and stills.
Right. But I think whether or not we're a Nikon shooter like Ethan, or a Canon shooter like me, or an Olympus shooter like David, I think these type of cameras aren't meant for us necessarily. I mean, Ethan, you're a freelancer. Me, I don't do this all the time. And plus, these cameras are designed for a specific purpose, which is primarily sports or other high-speed type of photography.
Yeah. So go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I look at these, the D5 and the 1D Mark II, 1DX Mark II, as their potential to bring that same type of technology to their lower-end, cheaper models.
Yeah. So my take on like the top of the line pro shooter offerings from Nikon and Canon, and I don't shoot. So I shoot the stuff I shoot with that I can afford is in what what Nikon considers the prosumer tier of their product line, which is the D750 is my main camera right now. That's my A camera, and it's for someone who shoots mostly video and also stills. It's just a great camera. It's like, I think video quality wise, I think it's rated higher than the was it 5D Mark III in a lot of ways. It's got pretty solid low light performance in video, and it's an all-around great camera for the money. As far as, I think what you mentioned, the fact that like the Nikon D5 and the Canon, what is it, the 1DX, or I apologize, I don't know the exact nomenclature, but I think that just like you said, those are marketed more toward people who need that high frame rate. Sports shooters, those are the kind of bodies they're going to use. Is the type of stuff that they can get really high frames per second. When they're shooting stills, and they do offer the 5K and everything, but just the difference in price for me, jumping from that prosumer kind of realm of like the D750 and the D810 for Nikon to like the D5, it's just like, it's not worth it for me. And I also want to say that that I'm currently in the process of breaking out of the Nikon-Canon dichotomy, and I'm pretty sold on what Sony's doing with regard to their video offerings. I think that Sony is and the products that they're offering, like the A7S II, and now their APS-C format that they're about to release, the A6300. If you look at the specs on those cameras for video, they're really impressive, and so that's kind of where I'm at. Is like, I'm sticking with, I like the Nikon D750, but I think my next camera is probably going to be that A6300. It would be the A7S II if I if I could afford that price point right now. But the A6300 is a pretty impressive offering for like $1,000, pretty much is what it's going for. So those are a couple as far as geeking out on gear. Those are the cameras I'm looking at, and I think that everything Sony is doing with its Alpha line or A line and those mirrorless cameras is really, really impressive. I think they have a really solid product offering for a really good price. And Dave, whatever revenue you get from that plug, I think I should get at least some of it.
Yeah, of course, absolutely.
So anyway, yeah, that's where I'm at. Nikon D750 and a Sony probably A6300 for my B camera.
Yeah, when you mentioned the A60 or Alpha 6300, I checked that out because I haven't heard of that camera before. I mean, there's so many different cameras out there released all the time, right? So, I was surprised to learn, and you can check this out, a link to Petapixel about this camera, world's fastest autofocus and highest number of autofocus points. So I thought that was pretty interesting. I mean, autofocus is neat. I love it, and I say more the better. Not something, again, I don't shoot sports all the time, but I imagine if you're shooting something that some people or things are moving in there, this is awesome. So,
yeah, it looks like for the price point, it looks like an incredible camera. I watched B&H did a sit down with Sony and did a nice kind of a demo video plugging it because it's coming out in a couple days. And I mean, the specs on that thing are really impressive. It can shoot, I think it can shoot 8 frames per second in live view mode for stills, which is, I mean, that's crazy to me. Like, I've never heard of a camera, shooting fast in live view mode. So it shoots I think 11 frames per second tops. When you're shooting through the JIT and not using live view, and then you can switch on live view and you can actually take 8 frames per second in live view mode. So for stills, and then the autofocus system, if it is as great as they're making it sound with, I think it said 420 autofocus points. I mean, that is pretty crazy and pretty impressive. So I just sold my Nikon D600 and plan to get that A60 or Alpha 6300 as soon as it drops as a replacement, because I think even though it's APS-C format and my 750 is a full frame, the specs on that are just too good, and Sony's image quality is really great. So their sensors are tops.
Yeah, I remember when I moved, my first digital camera was the Canon Digital Rebel, and then my second digital camera was the actual first Sony Alpha 100, I think, the very first digital camera they came out with. And I loved it because it had that dust reduction sensor in there, the vibration reduction, or vibration to remove the dust on the sensor. Because that was the biggest thing on digital cameras, you get that dust on there. But David, I want to throw it to you really quick. One of the things, and I see this obviously in all the camera brands, so I'm glad that Canon has embraced it, because they were really the last outlier in terms of DSLR bodies is integrating 4K. Nikon integrated 4K into their D5, although you can only shoot 3 minutes. Although I hear they're going to release a firmware upgrade after it comes out to make it 30 minutes, but whatever. What's cool about the 1DX Mark II is you can shoot 60 frames per second at 4K, which is pretty impressive because, like right now, my GH4 can shoot 24 frames per second at 4K, which is fine. It does the majority of what I need to do for a filmmaking endeavor I'm trying to do. But David, you said you shoot a lot of video with your DSLRs. You're looking at 4K. What are your thoughts on 4K?
Well, the big thing for me is that when I get enough clients and there's a critical mass of clients asking me for 4K, I'll be that much more responsive to it. I mean, 99% of my videos are for the web, and right now 99% of the web is 1920, or depending on your monitor, it can be a little bit bigger. But the web itself is not really 4K, and so I'm looking to it. I'm actually looking at the Panasonic bodies because the Panasonic body gives me the option of 4K and keeping my lenses, which is, I've got a pretty substantial investment in lenses. But the other nice thing is that the longer I wait, Panasonic continually keeps coming out with new stuff. So if I wait another 6 months or a year, I'm sure they'll have something that's even better. If I can slightly diverge the conversation, what I find the most interesting, to go back to the original question about the Canon, is that there are 3 of us here talking right now, and 2 of us are talking about the Sonys and the Olympus, and you were even, David, talking about your Panasonic, all of which kind of testify to that market that I think Canon is speaking to with that big, new, expensive toy. I just don't know if it's there when we have, all three of us have discussed how various video challenges we have are solved by cameras that are below that, be it the Sony, be it the the simpler Canons, be it the Olympus ones. I mean, it's amazing the capability of all of these, all of the cameras. The quality just keeps going up and up and up, and so I'm actually really excited because the next generation will just do that much more, like the Sonys, which I've looked at. But because I'm invested in the Olympus, I'm probably going to stick with that for a while longer.
Yeah, I mean,
good.
I was just going to say, I mean, to your question about the market, I'll be honest and say none of us are in the market for either of these cameras. Whether or not we could afford, I mean, it's not a matter of being able to afford it. It's just it's not a camera we need. Obviously this camera is designed for a very niche market, either for professionals who need it because they shoot something that they need that high frame rate for, or for people who want to look like professionals and have more money than they know what to do with, and they buy the bodies because they want to look like they're professionals. 95% of everybody else is going to be using other cameras, and that's, I'm excited for this camera, not because I'm going to buy this camera or that it's, a great camera. It is. I'm excited for it because it means that hopefully the Canon 5D Mark IV, when it eventually comes out, will have 4K shooting capability, and then I can finally upgrade my 5D Mark II to the 5D Mark IV. That's why I'm excited about it. That's the only reason.
So I want to say something about 4K. Like, so the camera that I mentioned before, the Sony A6300, as I understand it, shoots 4K at 30 frames per second, which is pretty impressive. I just don't know that that I have a need to shoot 4K. Just like David mentioned, working in 4K files. I've never actually worked with 4K files, but I have to imagine that they are a lot bigger and more cumbersome, and they require a lot of processing power. I have a pretty decent, pretty powerful iMac that handles most of the video work that I do, and I'm not really in a hurry to spend money on upgrading to a machine to be able to handle 4K. I just don't have that need. I think that the benefit for some people in shooting 4K, and processing is like, it's kind of like when you shoot RAW as a still shooter. It's like it gives you a lot more latitude in post to crop in on your original shot, and hopefully you've got some good color information there, and that kind of thing. But I just don't. I think that 4K. I think that a lot of people who are kind of attracted to 4K aren't really factoring those things. It is a selling point, It's like you're like, oh, it has that ability, 4K, but in all likelihood you're not going to use it, oftentimes, you'll need an an actual hard drive or an HDMI cable to go into a hard drive to really get like large clips of 4K. So that, again, you're talking about like more powerful computer. You're talking about another piece of gear, monitor, drive, whatever, to process those files. And so 4K, I think that for just like David says, for folks like us who are doing mostly web stuff, 4K is not really a big, valuable investment. There's probably some shooters out there that will disagree and say, no, this is why 4K is great, but for the most, and your output is rarely ever going to be 4K output, and the need's just not there. What I'm attracted to with that Sony I mentioned, the 6300, is 1080p at 120 frames per second. That's not like super. That's not, you can't get like super slow-mo stuff with that, but you can get some pretty decent slow motion footage with 120 frames per second. So that is more of a selling point to me. 1080p at 120 frames per second, high quality video, better quality video than I'm going to get on an iPhone. iPhone 6 shoots like 240 frames per second, but the quality is highly compressed and not great. So, so yeah, the 120 frames per second, 1080p, like higher frame rate at 1080p, that is always going to be a better selling point in my mind than 4K at 30 FPS. It's like, okay, well, so what? So that's my take on 4K, the 4K tangent.
Okay, well, I'm going to be one of those. I'm going to be one of those visual journalists who disagree with you on the 4K argument. Partially because, okay, now honestly, I have a top-of-the-line MacBook Pro, so I can't speak to, oh, well, you can run anything on this. Yeah, I can run 4K pretty easily with from the Panasonic GH4 footage. And honestly, the file sizes aren't that much bigger than your 1080p footage. So I would put that factor away. The power, yeah, okay. 4K maybe cause your computer to bog down a little bit, but when you upgrade the next time, you'll be ready for it. But to the question of I would say the viability or the reason to shoot 4K, the reason I shoot 4K is not because I output 4K, it's because I output in 1080p. And taking that 4K image and even compressing it down to a 1080p frame really increases the just visual fidelity of the imagery. And when I want to, like you said, I can crop into that image. So like I saw some of your work, and you have you shoot your interviews with 2 cameras, right? Like that. So imagine being able to essentially have a second camera within a 4K image, because you can have your wide shot and you can pop in to a close-up that's still 1080p. So it's just what I see is, again, yeah, 4K isn't there, right? Our TVs are just starting to become 4K. People watch stuff on the internet that's 1080p at most, but the potential to take that 4K and use it in a 1080p world until there's the eventual rise of 4K, then we'll go to 8K and whatever. I think that's the benefit of 4K, and also the archival aspect of it. You're shooting in a higher resolution that years down the road or whenever, you now have that higher resolution you can use it. So I would highly encourage anyone who is exploring it to really play with it, and first of all, test it out, see if the 4K will actually work on your system. You might be surprised.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree completely with what you're saying. I just think that, like, I would just caution people who don't really understand all the technical mumbo jumbo. I mean, there are a lot of people that are kind of just coming into this, whether they're new college students or people who have been laid off from newspapers, that kind of thing. I would just caution them that you do need to have the processing power, to work with those files, and just like I said, like some cameras, I want to say, is it the A7S II, or there's cameras that basically, like, if you're only using SD cards, you can shoot a maximum of like a 4-second 4K clip at a time, right? Otherwise, you have to plug in an HDMI and output directly to a hard drive. So that's something to consider, right? Is like if you don't have that extra add-on, if you don't have that capacity, if you're just shooting with SD cards, then 4K is going to be kind of annoying sometimes, because you're only going to be able to shoot 4-second clips. So those are just. I'm not disagreeing with you at all. I don't think. I think that that 4K is great technology, and I think eventually I'll get there where it's cost effective, I guess, for me to use it. Right now, I don't think I'm there. So.
Yeah, and I would again agree with your point. Anyone who's interested in anything, whether it's a new piece of, no matter whether it shoots 4K or whatnot, do your research, figure it out, see if it's worth it for you, see if your computer can handle it. By all means, I mean, do your research before you get into that. When I bought my camera, I did my research. I also bought a computer to go along with it, because I knew I was probably going to need more processing power than my 6-year-old laptop had. So I was in the market for an upgrade, and I was in the market for getting a camera that could shoot 4K. So they both kind of went at the same time. But yeah, definitely. I mean, do whatever works for you. And with Ethan, want to say, and I should have you on again after you get the 6300, because you're going to have capability to shoot 4K here very shortly. So I'm going to come back to you and be like, so what you doing? How's that 4K working out for you?
I will definitely experiment with it, and full disclosure, yeah, I have not had the opportunity to experiment with any 4K cameras yet. So maybe I'll come around. I know there's plenty of people, within my network who are great shooters and are shooting 4K and then compressing it down for web distribution. And so I absolutely see the potential for it and know that it is being used to great effect, and I'm sure I'll get there eventually. Right now, I can't justify all the additional investments, but that'll change, I'm sure.
Understood. Definitely gonna have to, because once you play with it, I don't think you want to go back. But anyways, we'll see. We'll get back to you, David. Anything else on your perspective on anything we've talked about? 4K cameras.
No, I basically kind of the same thing, which is it's a combination of what do the clients want from me. I understand the thing about cropping and the 2-camera interviews, so I will be migrating as well. I don't know if it's 6 months from now, but next time you have Ethan on with the 6300, I'll probably listen in just to hear what he says and keep researching. And there'll just be a trigger point that'll push me over the hump. I'm not opposed to it. It's really just a question of when, how, the economics, and the client demand.
Sure. I mean, you've been in this business longer than both of us combined, probably. You can probably speak to the idea, or I'm sorry, the transition from standard definition to high definition, right? I'm sure there was a lot of carryover between that generation, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you want, I can go back to black and white film versus color negative film versus color slide film.
Well, I'm just talking more of the video side.
Now you really dated yourself.
Yeah, I'm really dating myself. Yeah. I do think, actually, the thing that from the whole conversation about 4K that was interesting was the archival going forward thing interests me a lot, because that's the downside of looking at some of the old SD stuff, is how bad the old SD stuff and some of the old like 640 video from not that long ago is because I'm doing a couple projects now where I have to incorporate some existing video supplied by the client, and it's just bad. Separate of the videographer, the light, and all that, just the quality of the files is so bad. And so to make something 4K, knowing that to go forward it'll at least be usable and tolerable for somebody, does make it. That's an argument in its favor, which probably speed up ever so slightly in my transition.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, we'll be continuing to talk about this. Like I said, 6 months down the road, we'll have you both on, and we'll talk about lawyers and 4K and
that's right.
Grants you've gotten, all kinds of updates. But we are coming to about an hour and a half of the show, so I'm going to start wrapping it up now. We're not going to go into our last topic. We'll save that for another discussion. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to throw it out to you and kind of get what your picks of the week are. David, why don't you go ahead and go first?
Well, the pick of the week that I discussed with you, David, was actually one of my own videos, and so I'm doing a relentless self-promotion.
How dare you?
As somebody who's been self-employed for 30 years, the key to being self-employed and staying at it 30 years successfully is relentless self-promotion. So it's a video I did late last year on a small social service program here in Providence, Rhode Island, where this entrepreneur has built a business called Providence Granola Works, where he hires refugees pretty much right off the boat, and they make the granola, and it's all hand done rather than mechanized. And of course, it's teaching them cooking and other skills, but it's fundamentally getting them to show up on time and job skills and language skills and a work ethic. And so I did a short little 3-minute video on granola and how granola is sort of building the American dream for these refugees. And I ended up photographing 2 Iraqis, 1 Somalian, and 1 Kenyan, I believe. I'm trying to remember for sure. And I'm assuming at the end we can post a link to that video on the class notes. And for me, it was in some ways the most interesting thing that I've done, because all the skills of all the journalism and all the storytelling, which is what brought us together, and all the stuff I did, newspaper work, and I was able to do it very successfully in a motion audio based media rather than just in a print and still media. And I've been doing videos for like 5 years now, but this one is my favorite both because of the theme and the subject matter, but also I like to think I did a pretty good job of telling their story. Plus, of course, their mission, helping refugees resettle and adapt to this country, is an enormously important one in general and in the current political climate. So that's the sort of pick that I have, and I would hope people will look at that.
Great. Definitely include that in the show notes. Ethan?
Yeah, I guess so. I kind of thought of this right before the show started, and I just want to plug a couple of my favorite resources. I'm always trying to help out other freelancers, because I mean, you never stop learning in this business, and it's all about networking and trading secrets and whatnot. And not really secrets, actually, just trading business practices. But some resources that I find very useful, and there's so many, but a couple favorites of mine are Flern, which is a YouTube channel and a website, I guess, that just has, it's like my favorite photography tutorial website. So if you go to YouTube and you search Flern, which is Phlearn, it's like photo and learn merged. It's a great YouTube channel that has tons of free, like awesome free tutorials about all kinds of great tips for, from shooting in the studio and lighting to post-production. They just have really great stuff. And then there's a Vimeo, a guy on Vimeo or a Vimeo account that I highly recommend. And it's called, the guy is called Kogonada. So that is just some like cinematic, some really fascinating kind of cinematic styles and tropes that he kind of digs into. I guess they call them, video essays. So that's something that I highly recommend for the video side. Flern is more for the still side, and then Kogonada is just like a great like dissection of so many brilliant filmmakers, from like Stanley Kubrick to like Darren Aronofsky and Quentin Tarantino and you name it, Wes Anderson. There's some really good stuff on Kogonada's channel that you can watch and kind of get inspired by in terms of just like visual tropes and things that these master filmmakers do and have done. So those are both things that I recommend checking out.
Okay, great. Thank you. Excuse me. And I want to promote, of course, a website that I like to go to all the time, The Week, and I like to promote their best in photojournalism for that week. A lot of good stuff coming in, imagery from a number of different places, China. We have stuff here from Spain, just all over the world. Great imagery. Just the best in photojournalism the best in photojournalism from that week, and I go there just to kind of see what my peers are doing, kind of get inspired, and think like, I should travel more. So check that out, theweek.com, best in photojournalism for the week. All right, great. Thank you all, gentlemen, for being on the show, and this is your portion of the time of the show that I allot for you to plug whatever you like in terms of your. Where can people find more about you? David?
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me as well. Basically, the best place to find my work is at davidhwells.com. And if you don't put the H in there, you get a guy in Tennessee. He's very nice, but he's not a photographer. And if
have you asked him, like, can I buy your website?
I have actually, and what the deal is, about every 6 months he'll send me the errant emails, and every couple of years I'll send him a print. And I think he's up to maybe 5 or 6 prints of mine for sending me the errant emails. But
okay,
he's a nice guy. The other way that people go astray is occasionally they get the former pitcher for the Boston Red Sox and the New York Yankees. I'm older than he is. I'm not as wealthy as he is, but it's davidhwells.com. I have an educational blog as well, which is called The Wells Point, which is in my signature below. And it's got all sorts of stuff, resources for aspiring and accomplished photographers, information on grants and competitions and all sorts of stuff, as well as my regular bi-monthly blogs, podcasts, links, information, etc. What Ethan was saying is really true in terms of sharing. I don't think of the business as a zero-sum game. I actually think the more that we share this information, the more we float the proverbial boats. And I know your third topic, which we didn't get to, was the one about education. And briefly, I would divide the education up kind of in two areas. One is how do you learn Photoshop as a skill set, which increasingly you can get from the web and any of a number of other places. But the real skill set is this kind of stuff. How do you learn to think, business practices, the ethical questions? And if you get those from school or from interning or apprenticing, I don't know per se, but that's the thing that is lacking in many people. And if school's the way to do that, that's great. If you can get it other ways, you can be just as successful. But those are the skills that matter. Learning how to use Photoshop, there's millions of tutorials out there. But listening into these kinds of things and some of the links on the Wells point, some of the things that you guys were talking about, that's where the audience who are listening to this will get the other skill set, which is really what's going to enable them to survive and thrive in this business.
Yeah, I gotta say, David, just for our audience, you have an awesome signature block. If anybody ever gets an email from David, it goes on for about, I'd say, half a page. And literally, there are apps and social networks on here I've never heard of that you're just a part of. And so I commend you for just getting staying on top of all this stuff. Because, I'm a young guy, and I don't even, have the time for anything beyond, Facebook and Twitter. So to see you with all this stuff motivates me to be like, I should probably beef up my social presence. So it's an awesome signature block, and I'll be putting all the links to everything David does in the show notes. And to your comment about the topic we didn't talk about, basically it was about the difference between teaching yourself versus school training. And I think it's an interesting topic. We'll save it for another show. But again, with time and whatnot. But my personal thinking is, if you can get both, great. But obviously, professional education will only take you so far, and then you got to teach yourself at a certain point. And like you said, there's tons of tutorials out there, tons of educational resources, so there's no excuse not to seek self-education.
That's certainly true. Yes.
Ethan, what would you like to promote for yourself?
If anyone who's interested in seeing my work can go to ethanrocke.com or ethanrockemedia.com. My business is Ethan Rocke Media, so you can see some of my magazine features on there. You can see my some of my photography portfolios, and then also a lot of my videos that I've produced on there. So ethanrocke.com to check out my work. Don't really have any other big hire me if you're in the Pacific Northwest. There you go. If you're in the Portland area, you need a photographer or some video work or a writer, hey, hit me up. You can get me through ethanrocke.com. I do want to say that it is unfortunate that we didn't get to the education topic because.
Well, quickly, Ethan, tell us about professional versus self-education.
So I'm a product of both. I've been fortunate to have, great, undergraduate education through Syracuse, and then a great grad program where I learned video production, at the University of Oregon here in Portland, actually. And so that was invaluable to me. I do really well in formal settings, so that was for me a very good investment, that grad program. But it's definitely, these days, it's definitely not necessary. If you can't afford college or graduate school, find people on Craigslist or job boards, and go out and apprentice, for peanuts and learn the trade. That's traditionally how a lot of people come up, is they apprentice and they work as assistants for photographers and that kind of thing. And with all the freelance marketplace out there, that's the kind of thing that you can tap into very easily. It's like, hey, are you looking for a lighting assistant? I work for cheap. I just want to learn from you. So there's that route. there is countless resources online. You can get a lynda.com subscription. I will say that during my grad program, like we got the basics in class. We got some like hands-on, and workshops and stuff. But then I went and I expanded on that through lynda.com tutorials, countless hours of lynda.com tutorials, and other resources like Flearn and stuff like that. So every time I shoot a job, I try to push myself to the next level with by learning new skills. And so a good example is that documentary short that I won with the Audience Awards. Spent many hours learning how to do a lot of the stuff that I did editing that. So your education, like bottom line is your education is always ongoing. It never ends. And I have good things to say about formal education, but also practical experience is invaluable. Just getting out there and shooting and making films. I was talking with, the last thing I'll say, I was talking with a friend last night who's a really talented filmmaker, young guy. He was recounted a story of when he met Wes Craven, in high school at some event, and he was able to ask him, do you have any advice for a young aspiring filmmaker? And he said, yeah, make movies. So yeah, if you want to be a filmmaker, go make movies, go practice your craft. If you want to be a shooter, a writer, whatever, you got to put the time in, and you got to do the work, and that's it. Just practice your craft, do it, be passionate about it. That's the biggest way, the best advice I can give you as to how to learn.
David, since we did kind of open this topic up, is there anything you'd like to add about self versus professional education?
Well, part of the reason I was looking forward to the discussion, my wife's a university professor, and she teaches at the University of Rhode Island, and she teaches photography. And we have this constant dialogue about this exact question, which is how many of the skills that the students are learning are essentially learnable through lynda.com or whatever, versus the thinking, conceptualizing. The part that really separates one person from the other is that other skill set. And frankly, video has been the perfect example of that for me, which is everything that Ethan was saying. Every film project I learn a ton by making some mistakes and getting better and Googling and learning all this stuff. Every project is a huge lesson. It's the other things that I'm learning that are much more important than the technical things, because digital has done such a good job of democratizing those. And so basically I'm going to echo what Ethan was said, which is that just go out there and do it. The one other thing which I tell my students, because I teach a lot of workshops, is to learn how you learn. It's really, really important. Some people are really, really good in classroom settings, as Ethan was talking about. The way that I learn everything when it comes to software is I open it up and I start hitting the buttons and things, and if I can't get an answer, I'll Google that question and go on to the next thing. I couldn't read an instruction manual to save my life. That's not how I learn. I'm just a doing learner. I have a lot of students who are book learners, some of whom are visual learners. So to learn how you learn, that would be a determinant about whether you need formal education, apprenticing. I have a lot of interns who I work with for different lengths of time. A couple of my interns have moved to New York and become very successful videographers and photographers. So there's no one path, which kind of goes back to what Ethan was saying. The trick is to figure out what the path is, and then how do you get from here to there.
Yeah, I agree completely. I mean, I'm a product of both types of education as well. For the photography side, I have a very extensive formal education that comes from the military. It comes from Syracuse. But in the filmmaking side, I've never been to any formal school for filmmaking. I love the craft of filmmaking. I got a video camera, like a standard definition video camera back in '05, actually back when I was in Syracuse, just playing with it. I shot a little documentary with it. I published it on YouTube. Actually discovered YouTube by making a film and was looking for a place to publish it. So I was on YouTube train way before it was cool and anybody knew about it. So, but that's beside the point. What I'm saying is, got the Canon 5D Mark II, learned 1080p filmmaking, and did short films and all this stuff, and that was all self-taught. That was just me doing it and making it, making the mistakes and figuring out as I went. So yeah, I can definitely speak to both sides. Neither side is wrong or right. It's just whatever works for you. I mean, what's great about digital photography or digital anything is like, you can pick up a camera for a few $100 and immediately not only produce content but get feedback on that content. I think that's more valuable than anything, is getting that feedback. And so the barrier to entry is not, it doesn't exist.
That is actually one of the two things that I would argue for the formal schooling environment, which is A, feedback, and B, networks. Because we tend to work alone in isolation, and so if you have a feedback network, which I've got a fairly good one at, and I've got a relatively good professional network, it's not a problem for me. But if I was a young person, I think one of the great benefits of formal education are those two things, networking and feedback. And if you can get them through a formal schooling environment, great. If you can get them some other way, you may want to save the money. But those are the things that I think come the most value from watching my wife's work and her students, is those other things rather than the actual skill sets.
Yeah, that's what I think a lot of people underestimate about. Maybe they don't underestimate, but that one of the things I think gets taken for granted a lot is the fact that, you know, when you go to a good grad program like mine, you know, or any college program, you know, the network that you and contacts that you have access to is pretty huge, you know. So hopefully if it's a good program, it's pretty huge. It was for me, and also just the feedback loop and the mentors that you get through that process is invaluable. So definitely something to consider. But just like Dave said, I want to reiterate that if you can't afford college, right, and Bernie Sanders doesn't get elected, then you know, there are endless resources out there outside of academia to educate yourself and learn this craft. I know so many people who are great filmmakers, you know, and didn't do it. I mean, Quentin Tarantino worked at a video store, right? I mean, look at the guy now. You know, he doesn't have a college education.
Quentin who? I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with that name.
Yeah, you may have heard of him.
He's kind of a big deal.
It's kind of a big deal, yeah. So that's that, man. Is, you know, it's like it's all kind of, you know, what you put into it is what you get out. So
yeah, I'll definitely preach the feedback thing and the network thing. I mean, you know, there's so many people I still am in touch with from Syracuse and any formal education and military as well that, you know, have been great to keep in touch with. But want to end the show, you can reach me at DJM Photo on a number of different mediums, djmphoto.com, at DJMPhoto, tons of different ways, djmphoto@gmail.com if you want to email me, Twitter at DJMPhoto, tons of different ways to reach me. But what I really want to promote and push, and, you know, hope everybody reaches out for this, is the Facebook page. So, you know, I got facebook.com/ATL podcast. Go there, like the show. Stay up to date with what we're pushing out. You know, we've got guest book almost till the end of the month, and we're starting to get book guests into next month. So if you want to know who's going to be on the show, if you have questions for them or whatnot, that's the best place to put that there. Additionally, we started a Twitter page at Around Lens, because Around the Lens was taken by another guy who doesn't use it. I can't get it from him, so it's at Around Lens is our Twitter handle. Of course, we got this YouTube page, so you're on it right now. Hopefully, if you're watching us or if you're listening to us, go to youtube.com/AroundTheLensShow. I think, I'm not 100% sure. I don't think we actually have a novelty title, but you can get to it via the other means. We'll put a link in the show notes. So check us out. So if you want to see our pretty faces making expressions and, you know, talking, then that's the place to go. You can check out videos of every show, and hopefully this live broadcast actually recorded, and it'll be up on there as well. So anyways, I want to tell you all to go out there and check that out. And unfortunately, we didn't have Zach Roberts here tonight, but we'll have him next week. You know, tell us all about his New Hampshire experience. But for my guests, Ethan, David, thank you so much for being on. I truly appreciate your time. And I am David J. Murphy. This has been Around the Lens, and we're out. And stop broadcast.